Welcome to G42 On Air. As AI and advanced technologies scale at lightning speed, this podcast series brings us face to face with the change makers shaping our future. So take your front row seat with me, Amandeep, as we ask how these powerful new technologies are created, how they're transforming our world, and what's coming next. In today's episode, we focus on the disruption of AI in the creative industries, and who better to have in our hot seat than Sir Martin Sorrell, founder and executive chairman of S4 Capital and founder of the world's largest advertising and PR group, WPP. Sir Martin, welcome.
Hello, Amandeep. Now I'll be Aman. I'm not going to go Amandeep.
Sir Martin.
Yeah.
I'm going to begin by drawing on your extensive experience and ask you to cast your mind back.
Yes.
When you first started seeing the standout examples of the impacts of AI when it comes to the creative industries.
Well, in a way, because we work so closely with the platforms. So, for example, Alphabet. I mean, I can remember 2012 and the Olympic Games, and Eric Schmidt saying to Matt Britton, who until very recently was running EMEA well, still is, but he's retiring from running EMEA for Google, that AI first was able to differentiate cats through AI or online, and that was a sort of seminal achievement, and that was at the Olympic Games in London in 2012.
I remember
recognizing cats.
Yes.
You were there at the games. Whether you saw AI recognizing or heard about AI recognizing cats, so it's been with us. I mean, Alphabet also acquired DeepMind in 2014. So AI has been there for many, many years, and it's not a new phenomenon. So in a way, it's been subtly affecting what we've been doing. But of course, it's now moving at the speed of light, at light speed, and we're seeing very significant impacts on parts of our industry, if not the whole industry, which no doubt we'll go into in the course of this podcast. So I would say, the first time we sort of saw about it was something like, or sort of started to think about the things, was a dozen or so years ago.
And casting your mind back to a dozen or so years ago, could you have foreseen that we'd be in the place that we're in right now?
No, as I think it was Bill Gates who said, you always underestimate the pace of change and the scale of change, and you always regret that you didn't move faster. So I would be in that camp, or I would be guilty of that sin.
I think a lot of us would be joining you in that camp there. When we speak about some of the developments that you foresee coming in the world of AI and the creative world as a whole, does it fill you with trepidation or with hope?
No, I think opportunity. We're at S4 and our operating brand Monks. We're a disruptor. So we have 7,500 people in 33 countries who are trying to overturn the ancien regime. The status quo. So AI to us is about disruption, and it's another wave of disruption. I mean, very significant disruption, as significant as the internet itself or smartphones or whatever. I don't know whether it's the fourth, the fifth, the third, the sixth industrial revolution, but it is an industrial revolution. So it's a quantum change. The issue for AI, and I think we see this when we talk to NVIDIA, where we have a close relationship, is the development of use cases of discrete, and get into this, discrete examples that we can talk about. I was at a conference last week with one of the platforms. We had about 15 to 20 clients in the room, and the platform sales heads asked the clients for use cases, and there was dead silence. So I had to fill the void with the use cases that no doubt we can go through now.
I'd love to explore them with you.
Yeah, so the biggest use case at the moment in the industry is General Motors, and what Norm de Greve, the CMO, been there for a couple of years, ex-CVS, ex-Publicis Sapient actually. What he is doing, he's turned GM marketing at a time that they are very successful and made $3 billion, I think, in Q1, $4 billion in Q2, obviously challenged by what's going on in the EV and AV market in China. But he's turned the whole model. The usual thing is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Well, it ain't broke, and they're fixing it. And he has a discrete with Molly Peck, who's the Chief Transformation Officer. They have a discrete view of how the marketing model should change. So they pushed out 2 holding companies, and they've got 4 upper funnel big idea creative agencies: Mother, Preacher, Anomaly, and 72 and Sunny. And these 4 agencies are working on the 4 brands: GMC, Buick, Chevrolet, and Cadillac, and working on each of those brands. We started work on Buick, on GMC, and Cadillac. We'll start on Chevrolet next year. And we take the big ideas that those 4, we're the foundational agency across all those 4 brands. We take the big ideas that those 4 upper funnel strategic agencies have created and start to create, produce, distribute, implement globally that work. And so this is a revolutionary, highly personalization at scale. I think people forget that the advertising market is about $1 trillion this year for the first time. It'll hit $1 trillion, excluding mainland China.
So staggering numbers.
Yeah, and $700 billion of that is in digital, dominated by Google, Alphabet at 250, Meta at 150, Amazon at 60. Alibaba and Tencent are mainland China, and TikTok probably 40 billion outside. So, you have there 460 plus the 40 from TikTok. It's 500 billion out of the 700 billion are in those 4 platforms: 3 Western, one Eastern, 1 Chinese, or the overseas part of that. So it's a very, very concentrated industry. And I think what GM and others understand is that those relationships between clients, platforms, agencies are certainly becoming much closer. And I would say it's somewhat controversial to say, but the clients are getting much closer to the platforms. And the agencies, in my view, will be validators. You wouldn't give all your media money, let's say, to Rupert Murdoch or Bob Iger and say, get on with it. You want a validator to justify, from a measurement point of view, media mix point of view, media measurement point of view, what the right mix of portfolio. It's really media planning and buying is like media investment management. It's like investment management in the classic sense, equities and property and managing the right portfolio. So GM is probably the best use case. We've done similar work for BMW in Europe for the last 3 or 4 years, and that's another use case. Work we've done for SC Johnson, the packaged goods company. And then lastly, 2 cases around 2 platforms: Google Hatch, which is a sleep device and alarm, and then Forever 21 with Meta, are 2 case studies that were launched by those 2 platforms in Cannes, and they are the best examples of personalization at scale being implemented with the use of AI. So that's the background in terms of use cases. I can go into the specific sort of verticals that AI is affecting if you want.
And I think what's really interesting in the examples that you provide there, they're international, they're at huge scale. Yeah. And also the key word that I heard you repeat there was personalization at scale.
Well, it's hyper. This is Netflix, the Netflix model on steroids.
So what do we mean by that? Let's break that down.
Well, this is using first-party data with the signals from the platforms. I think we think marketeers, and we were talking to G42 management just a second ago, and we talked about agility. There are 3 pieces of advice that we would give if we could be so bold, marketeers in the AI age. Firstly, is agility is the core attribute that you need. Secondly, the marketers have to take back control. They've devolved too much control to agencies. May sound strange coming from an agency person, but we have 3 models: the classic outsourced agency model, the embedded model where we put people into the client on our payroll, and then where we in-house. So we are the subject of a Harvard Business School case study on media planning buying being in-house at Sprint and at T-Mobile. So we're not frightened to do ourselves out of a job because there's a ongoing need for talent and technological advice, and we think there's after-sales service. So the model, take-back control, is really important because a lot of the functions around data and the analytics should be done internally, and then not necessarily in the hands of the agency. And then finally, the importance of first-party data. Everybody talks about first-party data, but integrating that data into one cohesive base. When you've grown by acquisition, or if you had different CTOs or CIOs who made different implementation decisions, you have a very sort of mixed model, which is very difficult to coordinate. So agility, take back control, and focus on first-party data with the deprecation of third-party cookies. Not gone completely. Google backed off and nixing them completely by the end of last year, but it's going in that direction. So that's the background.
So our audience listening in can really use what you just said there as a blueprint: the agility, taking back control, and also this idea of ensuring that you have people on the inside and that focus towards the future.
With the first-party data, they're absolutely critical. So just let me run through the areas just very quickly that we see AI impacting the advertising and marketing services, and there are 5. The first, I've sort of touched on it a little bit, is visualization and copywriting. So art direction and copywriting is never going to be the same again. Our speed to market is much faster. What took us 3 days literally takes us hours. We sell time, which is the wrong thing to sell. We should sell outputs. We'll come on to that in a second. But in that area of copywriting and visualization, the time taken will be reduced. So our revenues will be compressed. And to be blunt, I think the number of copywriters and visualizers, art directors in our industry will be reduced. That's the first area. And that's current now. That's really happening at pace. The second area is what we touched on, hyper-personalization at scale. For a Netflix campaign, free AI, if you could describe it as such, we might produce 1 million assets. Now we're producing multiples of that. And we're starting to charge clients not on time spent, but on assets used. The price per asset may come down, but the number of assets goes up by such a proportion or a number of times that the overall revenues rise and employment will rise in that area. The third area is media planning and buying. I've touched on that before, but you're not going to rely on a 25-year-old media planner and buyer. You're going to rely on an algorithm. Why, if investment banks or fund managers make decisions based with algorithms on, division between equity and property and alternative investments or whatever, why don't you do that in the case of media? And it is perfectly suited with that 700 billion out of $1 trillion in digital, the mark and rising. It's 70% at the moment. It'll be 75% in a couple of years. And I don't know quite where it will stop. Maybe it'll all be digital eventually. But with that, there is no reason why algorithms shouldn't be able to give you a superior set of data, which human beings then can then use in a much better way. So the holding companies that you have, the 6 holding companies you have here represented in MENA and elsewhere in the world, the big holding company group media operations are going to come under attack. They probably employ something like 10 to 15,000 people in each of the networks. You're not going to need 10 to 15,000 people. And if we came back here in 3 years' time, I really feel that you'll see the number of people employed in media planning buying reduced drastically. The outputs will be improved drastically, and the decisions made by human beings on the client side and agency side will be improved dramatically. The fourth area is general efficiency. And I'll give you just a concrete example of that. We're working with Adobe and with NVIDIA on outside broadcasting. So we can reduce the cost of outside broadcasting by something like 80 to 90%. In the traditional outside broadcast of a football match, for example, you'd buy a truck, free-to-air broadcaster buy a truck, $10 million, $9 million, amortize it over 5 years, $2 million a year, let's say, of cost. Our solution, cloud-based, AI-driven, remote, so the commentator would not necessarily be at the ground, but be in some remote location, probably cuts the cost by 80 to 90%, $100,000 to $200,000. So that's an example of high reduction in cost and improved efficiency on the client and indeed on the agency side. There'll be more examples of that. That, again, will probably reduce employment, but maybe will stimulate more and more opportunities. And the final area, which I think is the most interesting by far, is what I call the democratization of knowledge. So if I said to you, what is the management span? How many people report to Jensen Huang at NVIDIA? If you went to McKinsey, they would tell you it should be 12 to 13 people. It's actually about 50 people. I think it's 51. He doesn't do one-on-one meetings, or few, and he sets each of his direct reports, apparently, 5 or so objectives, and then progress chases them through. What it tells you is that companies that are driven by AI are removing the verticals that prevent cooperation, transmission of knowledge, and bringing people together as one company. That's a huge advance because people maintain control and power inside corporations in verticals by control. Now, you worked at the BBC. You know what happens at the BBC. There are a lot of verticals, and the people who head those units control it by controlling the information. With AI, you have a free flow, at least in theory and subject to security and privacy of information throughout the organization. So those are the 5 areas. The first 2 are with us in spades. Media planning and buying is starting. General efficiency is there. Democratization of knowledge is in its infancy. So we're in different timelines in each of those, and those are the 5 things that we've seen so
There's
far.
so many interesting threads you've introduced there. I'm going to pull on them all and the whole of the tapestry will be undone. But I love the fact that you paint that very balanced picture, the keywords there, democratizing knowledge,
Yes.
but also repeatedly came up the examples, the real world examples, with the impact being the reduction of employment, which begs the question, people listening into this, how can they upskill? How can they make sure they're not replaced by AI?
Well, I think it's going to take away the drudgery. I think somebody said that the only job that won't be affected by AI is plumbing. Now, maybe there'll be a bot plumber, but...
Sounds like an opportunity.
Look, talking about theoretically, John Maynard Keynes, who was a famous Cambridge economist, wrote, I think in 1933, a pamphlet about the impact of automation, general automation on employment. And he concluded that we'd have more holidays. So Keynes was right, but he was 100 years too early. I think what we're going to see, I mean, ironically, COVID accelerated trends on work from home, work from anywhere. You know, big controversy at the moment. Is Amazon right to insist that people come back to the office for 5 days? If you push me against the wall and said, give me an answer, I would agree that I think Amazon's right. I think we've lost productivity by going to 2-day weeks, 3-day weeks, it depends which part of the world you're in. The academic evidence is against what I just said. The stuff at HBS, Harvard Business School, and elsewhere, which I've seen, seems to indicate that distributed organizations are as productive or even more productive than 5-day a week. My view is the Chinese work 9-9-6, 9 to 9, 6 days a week. And when I was in China recently and had to explain why the new Labour government in the UK was introducing 4-day weeks, and an inability of employees in certain circumstances to contact people after 6 p.m., the Chinese were laughing. So I do have a thing about that. But look, I think what's happening as a result of this technology is that the burdens will be lifted, the drudgery will be lifted away, and I think it may actually reduce employment. And maybe this is, maybe people are happier when they do 4-day weeks or when they're not interrupted after 6 p.m., and maybe we'll end up in a world where it's more balanced as a result. But AI is going to fill that void. It's a really interesting phenomenon. There's some articles starting to appear as the world economy has done reasonably well after COVID, better probably than we'd expected. But there is some sort of suggestion that employment levels, job openings, supply of jobs will be reduced. It'll be a little bit tougher. World growth is going to be less than it has been the last 40 or 50 years, maybe sub 3%. Inflation is a little bit more structural, I think, than people give it credit for. Central banks have had difficulty in reducing inflation rates, or taking longer than they thought. and interest rates are going to be higher, I think, than we've been used to. In that world, automation, improved productivity through automation, which is what AI is about. AI is, at its heart, in our industry, it's about simplifying workflow. It's about reducing and eliminating all the manual steps and making the workflow even more effective. If you think about concertinaing the production of ads from 3 days to 3 hours, what's actually happening is we're automating the process and we're knocking out wasteful repetitions of process. It's really about process flow, and AI speeds that in a dramatic way.
And so, Martin, when you speak about process flow and you use the word simplifying and efficiency, what about the other side of the equation, creativity, the incentive to make us more inspired, excited?
I think these things are tools. AI is a tool to human creativity. Do I think human creativity will be replaced? No. But there are people in the industry, I think it was Jeffrey Hinton, if I got the name right, one of the founders of DeepMind. If you remember when Alphabet launched their Gemini, or actually pre-Gemini, when they launched their first LLMs, he resigned because he was worried about the existential threat that machines would become more powerful than people.
Absolutely. And I think that philosophical approach is interesting, right?
Well, it's actually, I think, one of the reasons why Alphabet delayed. I don't know, but I'm guessing why Alphabet delayed. You know, they were somewhat criticized because Microsoft moved faster. But I think one of the genuine reasons was that they were concerned about hallucination and accuracy, and they were concerned about the existential threat.
And for someone listening in who's unfamiliar with the terms hallucination, what do we mean in this context?
I mean, LLMs may not give you the real answer. They may give you an untruthful or inaccurate answer. They may lie.
Lie outright as opposed to an inbuilt bias.
Well, it's a garbage in, garbage out. The LLM relies on data and the quality of the data. If you put bad data in, you get a bad answer, or inaccurate answer. As you train these machines on more and more data, they get more and more accurate. And it may be that we have more hallucination now, but as we actually input more and more data, we get it more accurate.
Thank you so much for your comprehensive insight. I feel like there's so much depth and broad. And so for our audience listening into this subject, what would you advise them when we are looking at the idea of upskilling or new skills in marketing and comms in particular? Okay. What should they be looking into?
Okay, so I think there are probably two buckets. The first bucket is, I think the biggest block on AI and development of use cases is the human dimension that we touched on. People are fearful of it because it's massive change. So preparing change, and that's, I think, the great thing about the GM example, a lot of thought has been gone into as to the human dynamics and socializing the change, because it's huge transformational change in the way things are done, in socializing that internally. That's absolutely critical. So if you like the human dimension, people think it's about machinery and process and technology. It's actually about people's acceptance of change. So I think that's one sort of bucket. The other bucket, I go back to what people say to me always, you know, what skills are needed. I always answer that question by saying learn Chinese. You probably don't have to. With AI, you don't have to learn anymore. AI will help you. I would say it's also learn Spanish, because I'm a great believer in the growth spots in the world. We're going into a world now which is going to be much more fragmented, much more challenged with the challenges around US-China relations.
Would you add Arabic to that list?
I'm going to come on to that. You're probably, but just to say, with US-China relations, or lack of them, with the Russian issue and with the Iranian issue, the world is going to be more fragmented. We're going to have to deal with problems which are probably almost impenetrable. In that world, it's much more fragmented. You have to pick your regions. I think Spanish is really important in the context of Latin America. As you asked me the question, I thought about Arabic too, because what we're seeing is a world where the cultural and social view of Arab countries is being changed by the leaders of those countries, both here, where we are now in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and of course in Saudi. And the visions of these leaders are, in terms of changing the brands, are not just about Olympic events or World Cups or F1 races. It's a change in an attempt to change the way the world thinks about Arabia. I remember the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia was, I think, at one of the FIA conferences, and he referred to Arabia, I don't think it was just Saudi, as being the new Europe. And there's a lot of sword waving and dancing when he said that, and so it struck a chord, a big chord, and I think that's a big cultural change. So I wouldn't dismiss that. I would add that, and the last thing is learn code. Again, you probably don't with AI have to learn any of those four things. They can all be provided to, but getting an understanding of the language and culture around China, which is currently the second largest economy and probably will be the largest economy, much to Americans' disdain. Learning Spanish, for the reasons I said, is a growth spot, I think, not just in Europe, but ever, and learning, principally in Latin America, learning Arabic because of the importance of what we're seeing here in the region. And then last but not least, learning code, because understanding code is critically important for that. Having said that, I know nothing about those four things.
I was going to test
so
you
it's
on all
just
those
probably
four
my
things myself.
weaknesses that I'm expressing.
So if I take a big highlighter and just highlight those points for our audience, is that acceptance of change that you talked about earlier on, and is that understanding of the growth spots around the world that you foresee?
Yeah, I think we're going to see more geographical fragmentations. You have to pick your markets. I've left out Europe deliberately because I think Europe, particularly Western Europe, so France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and the UK, are very flat. They're big economies, so there's opportunity, but the growth, if the world is growing more slowly, you have to pick your growth spots. The other thing is, where you do have flat growth or limited growth, you want to be more efficient. So understanding AI, blockchain, metaverse, quantum computing, et al., is going to be critically important for efficiency.
So now we've been talking a lot about the technology and where it can take us.
Yes.
Now, this particular conversation has brought you here to the UAE. My penultimate question to you is, you're here and you have access to people right at the top of society.
I wish, but yeah.
If you give us a bit of an insight in terms of what are you hearing behind closed doors when it comes to these big international visits that you're making, what are some of the things that people are excited about?
People are excited about the region for the reasons we just discussed. I mean, it's about growth. If you're CEO of a mini global like us, or a maxi global, or a medium-sized global, you're going to be looking for the growth spots. You go, listed companies go before investors every quarter, and they're looking for growth. So top-line growth is going to be more difficult to find. And if you have supply chain problems in China, what does Apple, Tesla, or TSMC last week? Chip goes to Mexico, despite Obrador, Scheinbaum, the drug cartels. So people are looking, supply chain, that fragmentation I refer to, the geopolitical issues, causing companies to look at things in a far different way. For example, one of our clients, really interesting, I never really thought about this, the biggest problem they had, not 24, but in 23, was the floods in their plants around the world. So climate change, which has brought extremes in weather, that's one of the big things. So altering the way they think about their supply chains, given weather and everything else, and geography, critically important. So the world is changing for that reason. So I think, that's what you have to think about.
So many fascinating points. I'd love to unpack them all, but we know that we are running out of time. So my very final question to you is, honoring the fact that you're here, you mentioned a fragmented society, but having this opportunity.
Fragmented world. Probably a fragmented society too, because you all see more polarization. Yeah.
But having moments like this to connect, so we appreciate your time here today. A simple question, because we're running out of time. Would you class yourself as an AI optimist or an AI pessimist?
Well, I think there are aspects of both, actually. I don't think there are going to be good actors and they're going to be bad actors. We haven't touched on regulation, but I believe that self-regulation by the major companies is critically important. These companies are nation states. A $3 trillion market cap, if you equate it to GDP, That's as big as, almost as big as France, almost as big as the UK, and probably bigger than Spain and Italy. These are big countries. And those companies, because of the capital demands of AI, are going to be bigger. There will probably be a $10 trillion company. There's only two countries that are more than 10 trillion. That is the US and China. They can grow in the meantime, but at the moment that is it. So these are big companies. With power comes responsibility. They have to exercise self-control and regulation. I referred to the Alphabet decision to delay for hallucination, existential threat. Might have been something to do with pressure on their search product. But I think the other two things played a big role in it. That exhibits sort of self-control and self-regulation. Otherwise, the regulator might pull the nuclear cord or press the nuclear button, which is break up, like an AT&T and an Exxon, because these companies are big. So they have to exercise responsibility. I don't think governments can keep up with these companies. So it has to be a partnership, and self-regulation, I think, is absolutely critical. So there are good things, healthcare. I've just gone through a cancer issue last year, and I've had, so upfront and personal, an upfront and personal appreciation of the changes that have taken place in medical science, not just through AI and drug development, but also through the metaverse. And it's quite extraordinary in terms of surgical procedures and the like. So we are on the cusp of life extending, huge discoveries, space and everything else that are really mind-bending. But there will be bad actors, and those bad actors have to be controlled. There will be interference in elections. We're already seeing it. So we have to be wary of it. So the answer to your question is there's some good and there's some bad, and we have to control the bad.
So Martin, it was a very simple ending question. However, I appreciate the fact that you've actually taken the time to give us a very nuanced, very comprehensive answer, and also, may I just appreciate a very candid answer as well.
Okay.
We do wish you the best of health.
Thank you.
And also, we're really grateful for your time. You've introduced so many interesting points. All I can end by saying is that we're going to have you back here on the G42 On Air podcast. We're going to shake on it. So Martin, such a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us. Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And see you for the next episode of G42 On Air.